Okay, hello, welcome back to another video. Today we are going through a game that I played recently at my chess club. The reason I'm deciding to go through this game is because it is one of the most beautiful exchange sacrifices I've ever made. It resulted in the most crushing, overbearing, and just insane ending that I've ever seen. I felt so powerful while playing this. I genuinely thought I was Magnus Carlsen for the entire time. It was one of the most dominant endgames I think I've ever played. And I'd really like to show you guys this game, so I thought we'd go through it. There's a lot to learn from it. It's very interesting, so let's get into the game. As you can see, I was playing the black pieces. That's why I got the board this way around, and my opponent opened with d4. Now, generally when our opponent opens with d4, I go for c5, giving them the option to either push past and play some kind of Benko gambit maybe, with knight to f6, c4, and b5. This is what I really like going for. However, when our opponent played c4, I was like, okay, I mean, I can take this, and it's probably good. If pawn takes, queen takes, we can bring the knight out to c6. This would make some sense. Or I could just play knight f6 anyway, giving them another option to play d5, to then play b5, and you see we've transposed into some of my theory. So I played knight f6 here. They did not want to go for this. They played knight f3, and I thought, you know what? We're just going to fianchetto this bishop. They played e3, just stabilizing the center in general, and I castled kingside here. Very standard looking position. They went bishop to d3, and I finally thought, okay, well, there's no hope really of ever getting my sort of Benko gambit idea anymore. There's just too much defense of this square. There's no way allowing d5 is a great idea, so I took the pawn here. My opponent obviously recaptured with the e-pawn. That makes a lot of sense. And then I played d5. I think it really is necessary to make some significant claim to the center here. If not, we're going to see white with just an absolutely dominant control of the center. I'm going to be kind of stuck maybe going for like little ideas like b6, bishop b7, d6, and like moving the knight. Just playing a little bit hippopotamus style. I don't really like playing like that, so I thought, okay, we'll play d5. So more of my thinking behind this was that if my opponent took here, then we could take, and take, and my opponent would have an IQP, an isolated queen's pawn, which is, although not necessarily a weakness, it certainly is something that would help define my game plan, basically blockading this pawn and applying pressure to it with ideas like bishop g4, removing a defender, knight c6, just attacking it. And honestly, if we look at the engine here, turning it on, it much prefers black, so it would not have been a good idea for white to actually take this pawn here. Instead of taking the pawn here, my opponent decided to push past, which is a little bit of an inaccuracy. It's not massive, as you see, minus 0.3. You know, no one really cares about that much of an advantage. However, it is very weird to push past here. Generally speaking, if anyone has ever played chess, they will have seen d4, d5, c4, the queen's gambit. And generally speaking, you do not want to go c5 as white in those lines. You want to leave this tension here. At some point you might want to take, and let's say our opponent just castled. If I take, then maybe they can take with the bishop, and all of a sudden this isolated queen's pawn is not as much a weakness as something to play round and to use the open files on the e and the c files after moving the bishop to have a really pleasant game for white. And I think this is the first sort of really big learning moment, is that c5 here, after they push past, the first thing I thought was that makes d4 a backwards pawn. Now a backwards pawn is a pawn that is basically not able to be defended by any pawn in either adjacent file. In this case, there's only a pawn in the c file. It can't be pushed, and you know, this pawn isn't behind it. Do you know what I mean? Like if it was on c2, yes, this wouldn't be defended, but it would be able to be defended with the move pawn to c3, hypothetically speaking. However, as pawns of course cannot move backwards, this will basically be a weak pawn, unable to be at least structurally defended for the rest of the game. So my next move, knight to c6, supernatural, developing the knight, putting pressure on this pawn. The opponent went for h3, which makes a lot of sense. If they just castled, then maybe I could have gone for bishop g4. All of a sudden, you are facing the problem that this knight is pinned. I'm putting pressure on this. The bishop still exerts pressure on this pawn, and it's not exactly so easy to get out of this. Like if you drop the bishop back, then if we turn on the engine here, I'm pretty sure I can take if I want. It's not exactly the best idea. Oh, we can play knight e4. And if you take, then takes, knight drops back, takes. This is going to hang in the end. Kind of a pleasant position for black, basically. So instead of allowing that, opponent goes for h3. Makes a lot of sense. Here I went for rook to e8. Now this is admittedly not the best game plan. It's pretty clear what I'm doing here. I'm preparing to play the move e5. I want to break towards the center. The reason this isn't actually the best game plan is because if my opponent had just castled, in this position, which they didn't. But if they had just castled and I'd gone for e5, everything looks nice. I mean, yeah, if you move a bishop, then you're getting forked. This was kind of the idea that I wanted to, make this a big, bold statement in the center with e5 and a rook on the e file. But if we calculate this, or rather just observe what happens, takes, 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 rook takes. And the rook's just really misplaced here on e5. It can be exploited for developmental tempo by the dark square bishop with the move bishop f4. And after rook to e7, the best move here, or even rook to e8, the bishop can actually come into d6, and this is extremely unpleasant. Very, very hard to dislodge this bishop, and so actually this wouldn't have been the best idea. However, opponent didn't go for this. They clearly got scared of me playing e5, which is, as to be expected. When I play rook e8, people get scared. And they played bishop f4 here. Now, this is a mistake for maybe a not so obvious reason. The way I exploited it was with the second best move. I played knight to h5, which looks like a weird move. Knights on the rim are dim, but here it is tactically justified. The bishop drops back, and then we took the pawn. Basically, the idea was we want to free up this bishop with tempo on this bishop, and then just capture the pawn. And after knight takes, bishop takes, we argent up a pawn in this position, and this is what happened in the game. The reason this was the second best move and not the best move is because our opponent could have gone for bishop to e5 here. He probably decided against this because he didn't want to give me just knight takes here, and then we get the bishop pair for free. He doesn't really have anything to challenge my dark square bishop anymore. But the engine wouldn't have even wanted us to take with the knight. The engine would have wanted us to go for this, and if knight takes, pawn takes, d4, the knight moves, and we play queen d5, putting pressure on basically everything. Maybe some bishop f4, f5, and like rook c8. Interesting idea. We've got to pass d pawn as well. Funnily enough, I said the move that I went for, knight h5, was the second best move. This is still a good move. The best move, if you want to pause and find it, be my guest. I'm going to offer you a bunch of opportunities to pause during this video. Do not feel like you have to take all of them. Sit back and enjoy if you'd like. However, I'm going to keep offering them up because this is, I think, a really instructive game. Best move was knight takes d4 here. And the reason this gets a little exclamation mark here is because after knight takes, we can play e5, and now my plan of e5 makes a whole lot more sense because we are forking back the pieces, and our pawn center is going to walk through here, just eating up pieces. After you castle, which is the best move, we take the bishop. This position is just a little bit better for black. If we turn on the engine here, you can see minus 1.8. We just have a beautiful open rook. We have the bishop pair, and our dark square bishop is actually able to be super active here. It's really pleasant for me, so I probably should have gone this. We'll also obviously up a pawn, although it might be kind of tricky to hold on to that f pawn. However, as I said, after knight h5, opponent didn't go for bishop e5, forgivably. They went back into h2, which also makes a lot of sense. And after takes, takes, and takes here, they played knight to b5. Now, knight to b5 is a very venomous move. It attacks my bishop, but it also sets up the idea of knight c7, coupling, synergizing with this bishop all the way, this long-range sniper from h2 to fork the rooks here. So it's not so obvious how I solve this problem. However, knight p5 is not actually a good move. I mean, it looks absolutely excellent. I obviously can't play this defending the fork here and moving the bishop because my bishop just hangs. Like, why is this a bad move? Well, it's a bad move because I am a tactical wizard. And I found, again, pause the video if you'd like, I found the move queen to a5 check. And white has a problem here. Anyone that wants to sort of engage in the more interactive aspect of this video, comment below what you'd play in this position. Pause the video, comment below what you'd play as white in this position. I'm genuinely really interested if a few of you could do that, because it's much, much harder than you think to find the best move here. I'm sure many of you thought very little of this check. I mean, obviously the knight can't drop back because then we could take like this. Then if you block with the queen, the rook's going to hang, not good. A lot of you here probably thought very little of this check and played exactly what my opponent did, queen to d2. Now, if I hadn't told you that this was a big, scary move, it might not actually look that big and scary. I mean, you block with queen, what's the problem? Well, for those of you who've solved it, bishop takes f2, a beautiful move, maybe not deserving of the double exclamation mark that I've clearly given myself here. It's not quite brilliant, but it is certainly a lovely move. The point is, this bishop looks like it's hanging in two different ways. Unfortunately, queen takes is not possible because that queen is temporarily pinned to the king, and if king takes, we've drawn the king away from the queen, and we could then take the queen here. So a really nice little tactic that I spotted. Queen to a5, they block with queen, and we have bishop to f2. So at this point, we're now 2 pawns up. Our opponent lifts their king. I mean, they can't really do much else. They probably should have gone to d1, according to the engine. doesn't make a whole lot of difference because you are just down 2 pawns. And in this position, I missed a really nice continuation. What I played was just, I traded the queens. And I'm still doing better here, and I'll explain why I traded the queens in a minute. But there's a really nice continuation with knight here, check. You still can't take the bishop because your queen hangs, and even though you get a knight, this is not enough compensation. I will take your bishop. You will be completely finished. Look at the state of your king. But after this move, knight to g3 check. If bishop takes here, then we take, then king takes, then we take here, and we're defending the fork. We've removed the dark squared bishop, and we're now defending this fork on c7. So we just be up 2 pawns here, kick out the knight, and run down the center with the e-pawn that already has the rooks backing. A beautiful, beautiful move. Unfortunately, I missed this move, knight check. For some reason, I definitely should have seen it. However, I went for queen takes queen, which is still good. I mean, the engine says we're still minus 1.8, it's good. King takes, obviously, is the only move. And here, this is what I calculated. From before I played queen a5, I thought, okay, let's think. Queen a5. The best move, by the way, after queen a5 was to just move the king, which I thought, okay, that's a success if I can just force my opponent to move the king. Then I might just play the move e5 to prevent the bishop's control of c7, and then eventually kick out this knight, and we just have a good position. That is all true. However, I thought here, we get this move, they move the king, we trade queens, and it doesn't matter where they move the king, because after we trade queens, their king will end up on d2. And then I thought, you know what? In this position, I'm 2 pawns up. Why don't I just take this pawn? And so I just took it. I'm now 3 pawns up, completely aware that my opponent now has the move knight c7, forking my rooks. But then, I have a check, the king moves, I play bishop d7, takes, and we've sacrificed a rook for a knight and 3 pawns. Now, I'm sure you can see where the title of this video, or at least the text above my head here, is coming from. Look at what's going to happen here. We've sacrificed for a bunch of pawns, a bunch of connected central passed pawns. We are completely winning here. If we turn on the engine, you can see minus 1.8, nearly minus 2 advantage already. It starts creeping up as the engine gets to a higher and higher depth. Opponent goes for rook a to c1. I went bishop c6 just to prevent any infiltration here, using the bishop as a glorified pawn temporarily. We saw a3, bishop a5, b4, bishop b6, b5, kicking my bishop. Bishop goes back to d7, however there is no rook c7 infiltrating. The bishop now holds that square. So here I'm thinking, okay, well you've just invested a lot of moves in this, but actually, you can't get in. You can't get in with your extra rook. And my knight, although it's on the side of the board, will inevitably come back in and be very useful, and you're about to see exactly how. Rook c2, and here I missed the idea to go e5 straight away, because if bishop takes, then we have rook to e8, and this bishop is just lost, it's pinned to the king, and there's no way to defend it. But I thought, okay, because I can't play e5, even though I could have played e5, I just didn't think about this. I went, okay, you know what, let's be patient, let's play f6, let's prepare e5, let's get the pawns rolling in the middle, because the king, the bishop, the rook are all just targets for my pawns to develop forward, to keep advancing up the board, this little phalanx formation of pawns. This is already what I'm thinking about, is that if I can get all of these pawns rolling, if I can create 3 connected central passed pawns, nothing will stop them, especially if I keep my king moving up with them, which is exactly what happens, and this is one of the most satisfying endgames I think I've ever played. Opponent goes g4, I drop the knight back here, then they go bishop in here, and I thought, okay, right, well this is a problem, because if I take here, then they're going to take, and if we turn on the engine, actually, it's white that's winning now, because everything's just hanging along here. We cannot let this rook into c7, was basically what I was thinking. If we let the rook into c7, this amounts to losing to me. So here, I played the beautiful move, knight, yes, knight, to e8. The point being that I don't want the rook in c7. So I don't have to let the rook in c7. I'm going to leave my knight here, defending the infiltration of this rook on the only open file on the board, because I still have basically all my pawns, except from the c pawn, of course. And after takes, yeah, we've doubled our pawns, but hold on a second. This is held, this is held, this is held, this is held. Like, you cannot get in. The only open file on the board, which is where rooks thrive, I have a knight and 3 pawns for a rook. Now that is 6 for 5 if we're doing the numerical valuations of the pieces. But in this position, it's not even close. And the reason why is that rooks need open files. And this open file is completely dominated. They played rook over to a1 because, I mean, I was just threatening to take this pawn. e5. our pawns are going to start rolling. How are you getting in and doing any damage? King up, so the bishop has room to drop back, because let's not forget, we were threatening to just trap this bishop here with the central pawns. They moved their king up. I thought, you know what? Why don't I move my king up? King f7. We're going to get under the pawns. They pushed this pawn here, adding a little bit of stability to the b pawn. Fair enough. I mean, I was keeping my bishop's watchful eye on that. f5. If you take, I can take. That is 3 central passed pawns. And if you don't take, as they didn't, they drop the bishop back to defend. Check. And now we have 3 central connected passed pawns. Look at all the squares. Let me put them in red so you guys can see a little more clearly. All of the squares that these pawns are dominating. The king, it's basically acting like a rook right now. The king cannot move forward. So we see king d3. And here I just played, you know what, g5. Let's just stop any ideas of this at all. It wasn't the most accurate move, g5, but I was still completely winning. We just hold this, preparing to push this. All very nice. Opponent played the move rook to c3, and here I was like, wait a second. King's on d3. That is very, very weak. How can I exploit this king on d3? Pause the video if you want to solve, but the solution is the beautiful tactical punch. Rook takes a4, because after rook recaptures, which is basically the only choice, we go check, picking up the other pawn, recapture the rook, and now it is beautiful. The reason, as I've said, that it's so beautiful, the knight is holding c7. If my knight was not holding c7, then check. And all of a sudden my king, this pawn's weak, the rook can get in and behind and put pressure on these pawns, maybe these pawns roll. The material balance isn't even that horrible for white. But if we turn on the engine here, I am completely dominating, because the rook goes across, and as you see, I played bishop to c6, just anchoring everything down. So if you're going in this way, there's no way to get in here. If you go rook to a8, there's still not really anything to do. The bishop holds this, the bishop holds this. If you go in here, I mean, just look at this. We hold this square. Let's keep it all in red so you guys can see. Here. The rook, if it comes into a8, will not from any of these squares be able to see anything that we don't hold. It is the most beautiful little fortress ever. They go rook across to attack the pawn, and I thought, okay, well, my knight's purpose is done. The c-file's all closed up by my bishop. Let's go knight d6. I'm not going to try and hold on to this pawn. If I push it, you know, that's just going to be bishop takes, rook takes. All of a sudden, this is going to be a bit more fragile. Just give up the pawn. We don't need that extra pawn, because I wanted them to take. Because here we can play the beautiful, again, another awesome little tactical punch. This wasn't all just a positional pawn structural dominance. This was, you know, loads of little tactics. We saw the queen a5, bishop f2. We saw this idea with rook takes a4 here, and then bishop b5 check. Here I played, pause if you want to find, here I played f3, which is really nice, because if you take this pawn, we go check and pick up the rook. We defer the bishop from the defense of the c4 square, send it over here, bait it with a little pawn, and would then have won the rook, so they can't take this pawn. Bishop comes forward, e4. Bishop goes all the way back. I'll bring my king in. I will bring my king in. Look at how the pieces are moving. This is basically, I mean, the bishop's basically a glorified pawn here. This is basically a pawn chain of 5. You cannot break through. And the fact that the bishop's here means that this bottom pawn is held. So the weakness of the pawn chain, even though this isn't strictly speaking a pawn chain, is held. There's no way to exploit this. The king comes up. My king comes up. I'm threatening to go check and force the king back. So they bring the rook up. And here is just, this was why I really want to make a video of this game. My position is so dominantly crushing that I can afford to go knight f7, rook comes in, knight d8, and then knight e6. I can afford to just bounce this knight around for 3 moves. Opponent has nothing to do. I have nothing to worry about. I didn't even think about making these moves. I just moved the knight around to then be holding the d4 square. The rook goes across, we go check. The king's forced back, we go check. The king goes here, because if they'd gone up, we could have gone check here, and we'd have won the bishop. So the king goes back, and here's just, it's just another beautiful move. Knight to f4. I mean, look at this. Look at this. We're preparing d3. Look at the king. It is being crushed under the unbearable weight of pawns. It's just unbelievable. Knight to f4 is just so gorgeous, because the knight is now just sitting here. The king is like coming up with these pawns. It's all just this little phalanx, this little fortress moving its way up the board. Opponent moves the bishop, d3. And okay, this is like the defining position of the game, let's say. This really sort of epitomizes the whole game. Obviously, I'm completely winning here. This rook barely even has any moves if we look at all the squares that I control with these pawns. The bishop, I mean, you can sacrifice the bishop for one of my pawns, but then, you know, you're just going to move the king, and I'm going to promote another one of the pawns. So instead, my opponent moved their king. We played d2, and it is mate in 5 here. There is literally nothing you can do to stop me from promoting, unless you want to play something like bishop here. There's some really cool lines, like you can sack the rook, but obviously we're not going to deal with that because then we'd be very, very trivially winning. We are just threatening checkmate in 1, by the way. So you go for something like this, we can just promote to a rook for style points, and the pawns actually hold all of these squares. I mean, knight helping out as well. Basically useless in this position though. And if they drop the bishop back to defend this square, let's turn on the engine here. I haven't actually analysed this. e2, just doing a little, oh my. Here. It's just beautiful. Look, king moves, and we can just promote to basically anything and win the game. Wow. Look at the pawns. That's ridiculous. But yeah, of course, it was in this position which my opponent resigned. They know they have nothing to do. The rook like can't even move. It's absolutely brutal, and they resigned here. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you guys can see why I felt like Magnus Carlsen playing this game. I mean, if we look at just this this little sequence here, with knight f7, knight d8, knight e6, ready to jump in to these soft squares. The fact that our position is that dominant that we can afford to just burn 3 moves, moving a knight from d6 to e6. This is literally a 1 square move. Obviously, knights are not very good at making 1 square moves, you know, horizontally or vertically. So obviously, we just burn those moves, and then the knight comes in here, and it's just absolutely beautiful. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed watching this as much as I enjoyed playing it. We're going to just leave it in the final position as I outro the video. Like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff that really helps out the channel. I will be back tomorrow with yet another video. This was maybe a little bit of a different style. I just really wanted to share this game. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye. Also, one last thing, comment down below, how many of the tactics did you spot? Thanks so much for watching. Bye.